is a weird. There are people with stiff neck at the end of this thing. Bueno, estoy por entrar a una conferencia, ¿no? Después de la tarde.
¿Vos vas a hablar de allí o te vas a venir para acá? Yo te puedo pasar las slides si querés. O sea,
sí, a mí no me queda muy cómodo tampoco hablar sentada.
Sí, yo prefiero hablar parado.
O sea, hay veces que igual quedo sentada porque está
¿Vos vas a hablar de allí? ¿O te paso o te vas a parar?
Tal vez me pare.
Sí, yo me voy a parar.
En algún momento, o sea, tal vez me pare, tal vez puedo hablar sentada, pero creo que me voy a parar. Necesitamos...
Aquí está el micrófono.
Y ahí está el coso para pasar y ya está.
¿Pero será necesario
Esto.
el micrófono? Sí.
¿Mm?
¿Será necesario el micrófono?
Porque si te paras, para la transmisión.
Ah, me para la transmisión.
Pueden venir.
Claro.
It's cold. It's a little cold this morning.
Yes,
It could have scared a few away.
Pero está bien.
¿El podio?
Sí, bueno. Sí. tenemos este micrófono.
Oh no,
Ya.
some water must have spilled.
Soy de la misión de Uruguay ante la OEA. Rosario Queiroz, mucho gusto.
¿Cómo estás?
Mucho gusto en verlo. Bienvenida. Ayer era una reunión también. Una presentación de Uruguay. ¿Tenés el...? Encantada de conocerlo.
Bueno, hubieran dejado así como estaba, ¿verdad? I need some paper to wipe stuff off. You get- ¿Lo dejamos así?
Sí.
Perdón.
Ah, está bien.
Pensé que ibas a-
Si no,
Ah, sí. Ok, necesitamos mucho. Ok. Ok. Let me go get more.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're going to get started. I think there are a few people on their way, maybe waiting at the door. We had a good response here to the invitation, so we're looking forward to some other folks joining us. I want to welcome you to the Woodrow Wilson Center. Let me turn this thing off. And our event, How Marijuana Regulation is Affecting Public Attitudes in Uruguay and Elsewhere. My name is Eric Olson. I'm the Associate Director of the Latin American Program here at the Wilson Center, and we're delighted that you're here with us to talk about this issue this morning. There's little question that public attitudes are changing about marijuana across the region. Majorities in 4 U.S. states and the District of Columbia have voted to create and regulate a legal cannabis market for personal use, and more are likely to follow. Different cities around the hemisphere, including Mexico City, are considering similar steps, and the Republic of Uruguay is the first nation to decide to create a regulated market for production, sale, and consumption of cannabis in the Americas. Yet there are still many doubts and questions about cannabis and regulated markets and how they will work. What are the impacts on crime of regulated cannabis consumption? What are the impacts on violence and organized criminal networks? What are the health impacts? What will this mean for children, workplace safety, productivity, educational attainment? Will consumption of marijuana increase consumption of other drugs or decrease it? Or will consumption of all drugs, regulated or unregulated, remain largely the same? Well, we won't find answers to all these questions this morning. We've assembled a first-rate team of researchers and scholars who have begun exploring these issues in the region and especially in Uruguay. Our three panelists, who I will introduce in a moment, are part of the Latin American Marijuana Research Initiative and have just completed field work and surveys about marijuana regulation in the region and in Uruguay. The LAMRI, the Latin American Marijuana Research Initiative, was established by the Latin American and Caribbean Center at the Florida International University and at Universidad Católica del Uruguay, and funded by the Open Society Foundation. The three researchers who will present today their findings are Maria Fernanda Boidi, the director of a consulting firm called Insights Research and Consulting that focuses on applied social science research in Latin America. We have a fuller biography of all of the speakers in the entryway. Second, or in addition, we have Jose Miguel Cruz, a good friend of the Wilson Center. We've collaborated on many projects together, and he is the Director of Research at the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies at Florida International University in Miami, and a visiting professor in the Department of Politics and International Relations at the same institution. And then Rosario Queirolo is Associate Professor in the Department of Social and Political Sciences at the Universidad Católica del Uruguay and is the Director of the Office of Research and Academic Production at the same university. As is our custom here at the Wilson Center, we have also invited an expert unrelated to the research to make comment and some observations about the study. In this case, we are joined by our good friend, Ambassador Paul Simons, someone with whom we've collaborated on many other occasions. Ambassador Simon is the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Drug Abuse Control Commission, known as CICAD, at the Organization of American States. He has a long, distinguished career in the U.S. Foreign Service, including a stint as U.S. Ambassador in Santiago, Chile. Finally, before I turn it over to Miguel, I'd like to thank my Wilson Center colleagues who have helped organize this event, Veronica Colon Rosales, Christine Zano, who had the good fortune to fly to Bogota, Colombia this morning and get out of this cold, and our intern help as well, Omaira Chuquiwara and Marta Cifuentes. So thank you all. What we'll do is have the researchers, the panelists, make initial presentations, and then Paul will make some comment, and then we'll open it up for question at the end. Thank you all for joining us. Miguel, you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Eric. Thank you all for being here for this presentation, and I want to thank the Wilson Center for having us here, and especially Eric and Veronica for all their attentions in making this event a reality. So what we're going to present here are the preliminary results of a year-long study, research study on marijuana impact in Uruguay. As you all know, well, Uruguay is the first country in the region, a hemisphere, basically regulating marijuana in all its forms, production, commercialization, and consumption. And wanted to take this opportunity to see how those changes in drug policy, so those significant changes in drug policy will affect behavior of the population toward marijuana, and also the potential implications in the Uruguayan society. So the Latin American Caribbean Center, in coordination with the Universidad Católica del Uruguay and Insights Research and Consulting, created this Latin American, what we have called the Latin American Marijuana Research Initiative, with funds of the Open Society Foundation, in which the main, the researchers are the three of us that you see here, Maria Fernanda Boidi, Rosario Queirolo, and myself. And we have, in this starting project, we have focused in 4 areas. First, an analysis of the enactment of and regulation process of the law. This is a unique process. We wanted to understand it in a sort of deeper way. Secondly, our project focused also in the analysis of public opinion on Uruguay, but not only in Uruguay, but because the 3 of us are members of the network of the Latin American Public Opinion Project at Vanderbilt University, we took advantage of the possibility to include in some of the questions that we were making in Uruguay in another surveys in 2 more countries, in the United States and in El Salvador. These provide a sort of comparative perspective of what is happening in Uruguay with data of public opinion in the US that is also undergoing a process of regulation of marijuana to some extent in some states, and in El Salvador, which hasn't any change, hasn't implemented any change, it doesn't have any intention to implement any change in terms of drug policy. The third area in which the project focuses on is the impact of behavior on marijuana consumers. And for this, we developed a respondent-driven sample survey that we basically implemented with heavy marijuana consumers in the Montevideo metropolitan area. And this is sort of part of the core of the project. And finally, and this is a part of the project that we're starting to implement, is the profile. We want to conduct some analysis on the profile and membership of the cannabis clubs. What we're going to present here has four parts. First, we want to talk very briefly about the legal framework. Then some of the results about attitudes toward marijuana, especially in Uruguay. Then we'll focus on who consumes and who doesn't consume marijuana in Uruguay in the general population. And finally, we'll present the results on the marijuana-frequent consumers in the Montevideo metropolitan area. About the legal framework, let me just say very briefly 4 or 5 points. First, we have to understand that the reasons for implementing or for this drug policy change in Uruguay are very different from those that are usually illustrated in the United States, right? Usually we hear that, well, Uruguay is undergoing something similar that was undergoing Colorado or Washington. Well, that is not precisely true. The process has been very different and the reasons have been very different. The initiative was a government initiative. It wasn't a people's initiative, a public's initiative. It was a government initiative, especially backed by President Jose Mujica, within the framework of the Convivencia Ciudadana sort of a plan. And it was presented as a measure to tackle the challenges posed by increasing perception of citizen insecurity. So it was a way to deal with this perception of citizen insecurity. And it aimed to reduce, among other things, to reduce the leverage of criminal organization and drug trafficking groups in Uruguay. So it was presented as a way to dealing with the problems of citizen security. And as I said before, it regulates production, commercialization, and consumption of marijuana. There are 3 ways that the law establishes 3 ways of obtaining marijuana in Uruguay. First, home cultivation or autocultivo. That is, a person is allowed to have up to 6 plants of marijuana at home with the potential to produce an annual crop of 480 grams of marijuana or 40 grams of marijuana per month. People, in order to do this, people must register. Those who want to cultivate marijuana in their own homes, to grow marijuana in their own homes, they have to register in the National Registry by the Instituto de Regulación de Cannabis y Control de Cannabis, IRCA, the Regulation and Control Cannabis Institute. And they are allowed to grow marijuana just in 1 location per person. This is not that every person can grow 6 plants in different houses. No, it's just one location. The other way to obtain marijuana in Uruguay is by joining a cannabis club. And these cannabis clubs are civil associations of 15 to 45 people, and they are responsible for registering all its members, and they're allowed to grow up to 99 plants. Every association can cultivate and grow up to 99 plants, and to produce an annual crop of 480 grams per person. Depends on the size of the organization. So depending on that, it will be the production of marijuana of these cannabis clubs. And finally, the third way of obtaining marijuana, which has been sort of the more controversial way so far, is the sale through pharmacies. Through this way, people should register in order to buy marijuana in pharmacies, in the local pharmacies in Uruguay, and they are allowed to buy up to 40 grams of marijuana per month in Uruguay, or 480 grams per year. Marijuana will be produced by a number of private producers licensed by the government, the Uruguayan government. And so far, the process to select those growers has started but hasn't finished yet. Prices will be regulated by the government. As of early 2015, the main debate on this is whether the government may make compulsory for pharmacies to sell marijuana. There has been some debate of people saying that pharmacies shouldn't be selling marijuana. Some other people supporting the idea, but there are some voices, important voices, saying, "Well, we're not that sure." And that discussion you may see it increased with the arrival of the new government, Tabaré Vázquez, who has expressed some doubts about selling marijuana in pharmacy. Let me move then to attitudes toward marijuana in Uruguay. And this is an important point, because usually we assume that Uruguayans agreed with the approval of the law and they want to have marijuana in the pharmacies or these cannabis clubs. Well, according to all polls and all surveys conducted on this is not quite true. Actually, it's the opposite. And the process has been, in Uruguay, the process has been a top-down process in which basically the government decided to move ahead with regulation of marijuana in Uruguay. Although there's been some civil society mobilization, but this is a very small, or rather not too large sector of the Uruguayan society that has framed the legalization of marijuana as a civil rights movement. But it remains basically under the initiative of the government. As I said, not all Uruguayans approved the legalization of marijuana, and actually only a third of Uruguayans approved the new marijuana regulation. You can see there that basically only around 34% of people approved regulation of marijuana. And if we compare this with the other two countries in which we have the opportunity to put some questions about marijuana, these are the United States, the national sample in the United States, and El Salvador, we can see the difference between Uruguay and the United States. In the United States, more than half of the population is for the legalization of marijuana, not only medicinal marijuana, but all kinds of marijuana. This is 51%, 51.5% in United States, whereas in Uruguay it's only a third of the population. And then you can see El Salvador, a very low percentage, and El Salvador hasn't had any debate about legalization, nor the government, nor the people. There is no an important movement in El Salvador about this. So you can see the differences over there. We asked a series of questions about their opinions on marijuana consumption. And in general, most Uruguayans, as of 2014, believe that marijuana will have a sort of negative impact on, or marijuana consumption will have a negative impact in different areas. For instance, you are seeing over there in the graph the result of questions in which we ask the people whether they believe that marijuana is harmful, for instance, for people's health. And here we are presenting the averages in a scale from 0 to 100. It's not percentages. Basically, we created this average in order to put all the responses together in one single graph. You can see that in an average, 71 people, basically, on an average from 0 to 100, are saying the marijuana is harmful to people's health. That's the highest, followed by this idea that marijuana is the gateway to hard drugs, and 71 people average, said also that people will continue buying drugs despite the regulation of marijuana in Uruguay. Only 40, on the other hand, only 48.5 average said that marijuana consumers are a threat to society. So this is the lowest sort of opinion in terms of what are the potential dangers or potential risk of marijuana. Yeah. The size of the survey in Uruguay is 1,500 people, national. Then, also, most Uruguayans believe that with the law, consumption and illicit trafficking will increase. In general, there is also a sort of a negative attitude toward the consumption, toward the regulation of the law. You can see that most people believe that homegrown marijuana will increase, that marijuana consumption will increase, that drug trafficking will increase, drug consumption will grow to some extent, and illicit sales will grow. These are in lesser degree. So we asked the people, why did the government enact the marijuana law? And basically, 18.5% of the people said that they didn't know. But from those who told us, who knew why the government was enacting the law, these were the responses, these were the motives. And the motives basically have to do with public security. So the people bought at least half percent of the people who knew about the regulation of marijuana, they bought the government's discourse about public security. The other people said to regulate a phenomenon already occurring, to claim money, to get richer, in other words. However, to some extent, Uruguayans believe that the law will have a positive impact in the fight against trafficking and advancing individual freedoms. Those are the only, basically, two things in which we found some sort of agreement of the people toward the marijuana law. So, in order to understand a little bit better this, why this regulation was passed, we run a series of regression to determine what are the variables associated with regulation approval. And you can see over there, I mean, the further the dot is from the axis, from the green axis, the most important the variable. And as you can see over there, the most important variable in these, in all the variables that we tested, was president's job approval. So this means that the people who approve the president and the performance on the president tended to see marijuana in a positive way. Then other important variables are people who have tried themselves marijuana, so consumers of marijuana obviously will have more positive response toward regulation, and also people who have family or relatives or friends who consume marijuana. And this is interesting because this means that, you know, even if people don't consume marijuana, but if they know somebody who does, that has an independent effect in favor of marijuana in Uruguay. You can see the relations clearly, or more clearly here, presidential approval, how the approval toward regulation increases significantly with the president's job approval. also in terms of previous experiences with marijuana, and the number of relatives and friends who use marijuana in Uruguay. Now, what are the variables in the United States? In the United States, there are similarities, but there are some differences too. The most important is previous experiences with marijuana. Again, we find president's job approval, people who see in positive terms the president here in the US, basically they approve the legalization of marijuana. Ideology plays an important role too, also in Uruguay. Actually, in Uruguay, it plays a very, very significant role. And an important finding is that in the United States, low support for the political system tends to be associated with marijuana approval, and also young people. There is a clear generational issue or generational point here that the younger generation approves the legalization of marijuana significantly more than other ages. And as I said, ideological orientation playing an important role in both countries, Uruguay and the US, but it's especially important in Uruguay, in which basically the left, the political left, has embraced the regulation of marijuana as an important cause. In sum, for this part, the president's popularity played a key role in passing the law on marijuana in Uruguay, despite the opposition of most of Uruguayans. And although people have mixed feelings, if not negative feelings about marijuana, the law didn't find a significant opposition because it was not salient to the Uruguayan public. It wasn't an important issue for the Uruguayan public, even if it was framed as an issue or as a strategy to combat crime and to deal with drug trafficking. Let me pass the mic then to my colleague, Rosario Queiroz, who will continue.
You want to change places?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's better, no? Well, thanks, Miguel. I'm going to tell you something about who consumes and who doesn't consume marijuana in Uruguay. First, prevalence and prevalence figures. As you know, there are several ways to measure prevalence of consumption of marijuana. One is the life prevalence. So life prevalence measures the percentage of people who have at least tried or experienced with marijuana in their lives. Then we have the year prevalence that measures the percentage of the population that has consumed marijuana during the last year. And the third measure is the monthly prevalence, which measures the percentage of people that consume during the last month. No? So marijuana consumption has been increasing in Uruguay since we have reliable measures of prevalence. So the National Board of Drugs in Uruguay has national household surveys measuring drugs consumption since 2001. No? And we have that, looking at that figures, we have that life prevalence has quadrupled from 2001 to 2014. Annual prevalence increased by 6 times in the period from 2001 to 2011, and monthly prevalence increased by 10 during the same period. This figure shows what I have just said, and you can see the increasing tendencies in the 3 measures of prevalence. So we don't have this, as I have just said, this information, this data comes from the Encuesta Nacional sobre Consumo de Drogas en Hogares, which is the household survey that measures drug consumption. But the data from the 2014 is not ready yet. They are finishing some editing, and they will be public soon. So for the 2014, we are using the Americas Barometer survey, the same data that Miguel has showed, the public opinion data. So that's the figure using the Americas Barometer data. And in that survey, we only ask about life prevalence, but you can see like the tendencies are kind of similar to the measures of the National Household Survey. So, prevalence in youth. We know that the starting age, at least the latest data that we have, that is the 2011, was 18.3. And we also know, through another source, that is a national survey of high school students. This is a survey carried out in public and private schools, and respondents have between 13 and 17 years old. So we also can see an increasing consumption since 2003 to 2014, that is the latest data, from 8.4% in 2003 to 17% in 2014. So you can see the graph here. So this is another source, and we have also that prevalence has doubled in 10 years among these are high school students. So in 2011, the year prevalence for the whole population, I mean, whole population is not whole, is over 18, was 8.3%. The daily consumers were 14.6 of these 8.3, which approximately are 18,700 Uruguayans. No? These are Uruguayans that consume daily, but the ones that live in houses. So the survey doesn't reach those who doesn't live in houses, that live, for example, in the street. So we know from other sources, for example, from a coca-paste study, that there are almost 11,000 Uruguayans that consume marijuana daily, but they are not reached through the household survey because they live in the streets. So I think the National Board of Drugs have they measure that more or less there are 30,000 Uruguayans who are daily consumers of marijuana. Should we trust this data on prevalence? You know that for some kind of sensitive topics, sometimes social desirability kind of makes that people hide their real behavior. So what we did to know if this data, if we can really trust on this data, is to run a list experiment in a survey, in the Americas Barometer survey in Uruguay. So I am not going to get into the detail of the list experiment. I will be happy to tell you more about afterwards. But what I can tell you is that if we compare the prevalence number that we have from asking directly the people if they consume marijuana with the prevalence data that we get from the list experiment is almost the same. You can see is 22.1 the prevalence data coming from the direct question, and 22.7 the data coming from the list experiment, which is an indirect way to measure prevalence. Okay, so at least in March 2014, when this survey was carried out, with the new law of marijuana legalization already in place, no underreporting of marijuana consumption existed in Uruguay, and no significant underreporting. So that is kind of of good to know because lead us to believe in the data and the prevalence data that I have just shown to you. So, life prevalence of marijuana in Uruguay in comparison with El Salvador and the US. This is data also from the America's Barometer data survey. In Uruguay, 22% have at least tried once in their life marijuana. In El Salvador, it's only 11%, and the US reaches 58%. This kind of data pattern is very similar, shows a similar distribution to the support for marijuana legalization. Okay? Trying to compare this data, and particularly this 8.3 prevalence year prevalence in Uruguay. This is more or less the same as the whole continent, in the whole American continent, but this is higher than the South American average, which is 4.3, and is higher than the Central America average, and also higher than the Caribbean average, but lower than the US average, okay? Who consumes in Uruguay? So these graphs show some characteristics that have a positive impact on consuming. Know that, for example, you see in the top of the list of variables that ideology is a significant predictor on consumption. Being leftist increase your probability of consuming marijuana. Having a lower level of religiosity too. Living in Montevideo. Being young. Having a higher income. And being male. All these characteristics, in a way, increase your probability of consuming marijuana. Actually, this is another way to see the impact of age. An Uruguayan between 18 and 25 has a probability of consuming marijuana, of at least have tried marijuana or experience with marijuana of 0.49. Well, if you are between 57 and 65, your probability is 0.08, a very low one. So, in sum, we know from this analysis that data are reliable. We have a long series of prevalence data and different measures that in a way they are showing the same, that consumption has increased in the last 10 years since the beginning of the 21st century. All prevalence types have that, show that, no? that consumption have increased, and especially among youth and those under 18. So this is kind of a red flag, we think, about the law implementation, and that the government needs to kind of think deeply on the prevention policies that they will implement, because, you know, well, prevalence in use is kind of a warning, the increase on the prevalence measures, and also because with the new law, consuming under for people under 18 remain illegal. So this is a problem too. So I'm going to.
Thank you, Rosario.
You're welcome.
Maria Fernanda. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the last part of the presentation will focus on a respondent-driven sample study of frequent marijuana consumers we conducted in Montevideo and Montevideo metropolitan area in Uruguay.
Hold on just a second. If people are having trouble seeing, there's plenty of space up here. Yeah. Please feel free to move up.
Okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So a respondent-driven sample, as its name indicates, it's a sort of a study that relies on a changed referral mechanism to recruit study participants. The original methodology was developed by Douglas Eckarton, and essentially, it's a method that combines snowball recruitment, where one participant is requested to bring new participants into the study, with a system of weights for that analysis that compensates for the non-random nature of the sample. So we can talk about this more in detail later, perhaps, but this is deemed as an ideal method for sampling hard-to-reach populations, populations for which there is no sampling frame, or populations who have some reticency to come forward about their belonging to that population. And even though Uruguayans don't seem very concerned about reporting their experiences with marijuana, as Rosario and Miguel just explained a few minutes ago, we found during the preliminary research of our study that they were concerned about going into more detail, right? One thing is admitting that you ever tried marijuana, a behavior that is legal in Uruguay since the 70s, by the way. Something different is saying that you have plants at home, or that you cultivate and you sell your surplus to your friends, or that you actually acquire marijuana in the streets, which is, of course, illegal. And these questions were at the heart of our research project. So we needed to develop a study that provide our research subjects an environment of confidence, of trust. That's why we decided to go for the RDS methodology. So our target group is defined as individual citizens who live in Montevideo metropolitan area and that consume marijuana at least once a week. This is then a study of frequent consumers only, and therefore it's not representative of all marijuana consumers, and we think this is important to keep in mind once we go through the actual data. We concentrated in Montevideo and the metropolitan area for two reasons. The methodology requires a network, so they needed to live all in the same space, in the same geographical area, and even though Uruguay is a pretty small country, we needed to concentrate in a part of it. Montevideo hosts more than half of the population that lives in the entire country, so we felt pretty confident about having a study only in Montevideo. Data collection took place at the end of 2014, so this is, of course, a project that still is under analysis. And we use, the standard, software analysis for RDS, started with the standard statistical procedures. So we started with 5 seats, 5 hand-picked individuals chosen by our research team that were, diverse in background, gender, socioeconomic status, marijuana consumption patterns, and each of them was asked to recruit 3 new participants, bring 3 new participants to the study, and this change continued with every new interviewee. So each interviewee was asked to bring 3 more participants. We gave them, we don't have the coupon there. We gave incentives for granting the interview and also from bringing new participants into the study. This is how the methodology works. This is the recruitment tree. So you can see the darker green spots there are the 5 initial interviewees, and then the change that developed from them. So we had 3 highly successful chains of recruitment, 2 of them not much so, but under all the tests for the analysis are data proved to be pretty reliable. So now the results. Our respondents are truly high-frequency users, right? We asked them how many days in a week they consume marijuana, and these are the results. A third of the sample consumes every day. And then we have, a small percentage of the sample that consumes only once a day. Only once a week, and that was the requirement to be sampled. We had individuals interested in participating in the study who contacted us and saying, well, I smoke, some weekends I do, some weekends I don't. We did not interview those. So to qualify to be a part of the study, you needed to consume marijuana at least once a week. And we got a lot of the high-frequency consumers, with mostly, however, moderate consumption patterns. We also asked them how much marijuana they consume, the days in which they consume, and more than half of the sample consume 1 gram or less. We have there 37% consuming 1 gram, the days they consume, and an additional 26%, even less than a gram. Of course, there is a lot of variation depending on how many days a week they consume. So for those who consume marijuana daily, the average is over 3 grams per day. For those who consume marijuana, 1 or 2 days a week, it's less than 1 gram per day. So there is also variation on that. Self-grow and cannabis clubs are the only legal methods to obtain marijuana in Uruguay right now. As Miguel was explaining, it is projected that marijuana will be available in pharmacies. We are not even close to get to that yet, because that marijuana who will be sold in pharmacies has not even been planted yet. So the only legal way to acquire marijuana is if you grow your plant at home and are registered to do that, or if you belong to a cannabis club that is already producing. However, we see a lot of individuals acquiring marijuana through illegal ways. We asked our respondents to mention all the mechanisms they had used to access marijuana during the previous 12 months. So 62% bought pressed marijuana, the compacted marijuana that typically comes from Paraguay. I'll explain a bit more about that in a second. Or they bought flowers directly. And flowers is, the marijuana, the fresh marijuana that someone grew at their homes. They also, many responded, had someone else purchasing marijuana for them, either the pressed marijuana or the flowers. So it's a very common practice for a group of friends or acquaintances to get together, pool the money together, and send in only one to the distribution point in order to reduce the risk, for those who don't go anyways. 27% reported to have grown marijuana by themselves, and an additional 14% grew marijuana in a group, probably in a club or club under formation setting. And they received a lot of free marijuana as well. Individuals gave others pressed marijuana and gifted flowers. And we have perhaps we have a problem there with the terminology, because some individuals use the same word to express someone gave them marijuana, but some, just like some leaves of marijuana for them to smoke whenever, but it also means sharing a joint. So the more knowledge of consumers in Spanish, they use a different word for sharing a joint, which is convidar, which is, a synonym for sharing. But some others just say, sharing, and sharing might mean the two different behaviors. So we are still digging into that. So let me tell you a bit more about the different types of marijuana available in the Uruguayan market. As I was saying, pressed marijuana comes almost entirely from Paraguay, and it's called prensado in Spanish, which is pressed, in reference to the way it is packed. You can see, a small block of pressed marijuana under. It is commercialized in small blocks of 25 grams, a little less than 1 ounce, and it's commonly referred to as a 25, un 25, right? Because it's 25 grams. It costs around $30. Pressed marijuana can also be purchased in smaller quantities, typically by the gram, which is enough, for a joint or two. And these smaller packages cost between $1 and $2 and are called palancas or handles. And you can see a picture of a palanca there. So if you are short on money, or if you don't want to store marijuana because you want to control your behavior, you go and buy a palanca, or you have someone else going and buying a palanca for, for the day or the weekend or the morning, depends on your consumption pattern. So this pressed marijuana, or, the palanca, but anyways, it's the marijuana that comes from Paraguay, comes from, the drug trafficking, is regarded by many consumers as dirty marijuana, who claim not to have other choice than purchasing it. And it's because also it's deemed as low quality, it has chemicals on it, and low potency. It's regarded by most consumers as very low THC marijuana. In addition to this marijuana that comes from Paraguay and it's in the market, individuals have reported to purchase flowers. Flowers are the product of local self-growers. It can be friends who have a surplus of marijuana, or it can be, local entrepreneurs who became successful at growing marijuana in Uruguay. The market for flowers is smaller, but it's reported to be growing and growing fast. flowers are much more expensive than pressed marijuana. 25 grams of flowers can be easily paid around $100. And this is due to the perceived quality of the product and also the perceived and reported potency of the product. In addition of asking for all the methods used to access marijuana during the past year, we asked them which was the most recent method used, and the purchase of pressed marijuana, either directly or by someone else, is clearly the most popular way to obtain marijuana. So yeah, even though we have legal ways to access marijuana, the illegal ones are the ones that are prevailing, at least until now. Okay. Respondents consume marijuana in a variety of ways. We asked them to indicate all forms in which they had consumed marijuana during the past year. And even when the joint is the most common way of consuming marijuana, no doubt, Uruguayans are getting really creative with marijuana. So a quarter of our sample of high-frequency consumers declared to have tried edibles during the last year. And we had a full list, a full detailed list of the edibles they reported having consumed, from the classic brownies, of course, and cookies, to milkshakes or daiquiris or even mate. It's a very popular tea-like drink in Uruguay, and individuals report to add marijuana leaves to the boiling water that is used to prepare mate. Medical preparations are also kicking in. It is not one of the most frequent ways of consuming marijuana, but individuals are reporting to use either creams or tinctures for several use. Even for risk reduction, in the case of drug addicts, they use it to lower, the anxiety levels. That's what they report. When asked about the most popular, most frequent way of consuming marijuana, of course, the joint is the winner. So we have a ton of other data on the profile of frequent consumers, but in the remainder of these presentations, I'll focus on two aspects that we think are key for understanding the challenges that the marijuana law will face soon in Uruguay. Risk behavior and attitudes toward the law itself. So first, there is no perception of risk about doing daily activities under the influence of marijuana. There is no perception of risk whatsoever among frequent consumers. They consume in public spaces, they circulate in public spaces under the effects. And of course, a pedestrian under the influence is less of a threat to public safety than an intoxicated, driver. But while eventually everybody is a pedestrian, not everybody, drives a car or a motorbike. And given that our estimates are calculated over the total of respondents, these are very conservative estimates. We didn't filter for those who drove or not. So once that filter is in place, we should expect much higher rates of risk behavior. Even for operating heavy equipment, 11% of the entire sample of frequent consumers said they had operated heavy equipment under the influence. If you take out of that those who have never deal with heavy equipment, to be a lot of people. While it is virtually impossible to keep an eye on pedestrians being stoned with marijuana, things are different at work and at education institutions, right? More than half of the respondents, 55.4 actually, declared that they had consumed marijuana and went to work before 4 hours had passed, which probably means they went to work under the influence. Likely, more than 6 out of every 10 interviewees, 63% almost, declared to have attended classes within a time frame of 4 hours after consuming marijuana. And by the way, we included these questions in our study because the National Drugs Board was really, the people there were really interested in knowing risk behavior, and they've recommended the inclusion of these questions. So there is concern among the authorities about this type of behaviors and how they might evolve once the law is fully in place. We also asked our respondents how they felt going to work or to class under the effects versus going sober. Those who went to work after consuming marijuana reported that their performance in the job was either enhanced, 36.1%, equal, 30%, or worse, almost 34%, compared, of course, to when they go to work sober. And it's too bad that we didn't include questions on type of work, because this will have probably shed light on this. We do have a ton of anecdotal evidence from the interviews, though. So individuals who report having jobs who required a lot of physical effort from them, they had this narrative that smoking a joint in the breaks really helped them. Those who have creative jobs also. But some others say, well, I have to deal with people. I'm just like a plant there. I just want, I smoke a joint and then I just wait for time to pass to try to deal with it. So we had reports of very different kind of experiences at work. It's different, though, in what regards to attending class under the effects, because there is a moderate consensus about the fact that performance diminishes when they go to class under the effects. 64% of respondents almost felt that way. We also have data on risk behavior of pregnant women and women, who are women during lactation, but those are kind of source for concern as well. We are not presenting this now. We won't have enough time to dig into that. So, of course, the law is popular among frequent consumers. 9 out of 10 agree with the law. I mean, if you don't get support for the law among frequent consumers, I have no idea who will do it. However, 58 of those high-frequency consumers from the metro area plan to register. So this is the glass half full. 6 out of 10 says they will, abide by the new law and register to become a marijuana consumer. The half-empty glass view of it is that 4 out of 10 say they will not register. 20% said, hell no. I mean, I will not register under no conditions. And another 20% said, probably no. Those who said either probably not registering or surely not register, we asked them why they rejected the registry, and it mostly has to do with the perceived opportunity cost of registering. Why would they do it if there is no benefit involved, at least the way they perceive this? And they do think there are risks. Unless they plan to purchase marijuana in pharmacies, the registry is not necessary to continue accessing marijuana. Self-law or black market. So if you're a cultivator, being registered means the government knows you grow marijuana. It also means the government knows where you live and where you keep your plants. And it means they can come to your house, just to check how your plants are going. So if you have more plants than those allowed, for instance, or if you plan to at some point have more plants, you wouldn't like to register because you'll be at risk. Opposition to the registry also has to do with normative concerns, right? There's almost 20% that they reject the idea of the registry just because they don't believe there should be a registry of marijuana consumers. And they argue, hey, there is no registry of tobacco smokers, there is no registry of those who drink beer, and there is no registry of individuals who eat red meat, which consumed in high quantities can be very damaging to your health as well. So why would you need a registry for marijuana consumers? So this is the hard group. I mean, these are those who are going to be really hard or perhaps impossible to convince to become registered because they have like a philosophical point of view against it. And then you have an additional 21%, 20.9, who simply don't trust the registry. They don't believe it will be purely confidential. They don't know what will happen once a new government takes place. They don't know how the state will handle the registry. Maybe they won't be able to get a job in the public administration. They fear of hackers. There is a lot of paranoia going on there. And the lack of communication about the registry and how it will be kept doesn't help either. However, among those who plan to register, 6 out of 10, the controversial pharmacy mechanism is preferred, right? When we ask them, okay, which method will you choose to register? The law establishes that you can pick only one method to be registered as a marijuana consumer. So you cannot grow marijuana and also purchased it in pharmacies. One is available in pharmacies. So you have to pick one. And most of our respondents didn't know that. So when we asked them, and they say, hey, of course, I'll keep my plans, but I want to, guarantee my supply of marijuana, so I'll also go to the pharmacies. And, our interviewers were like, no, you won't be able to do that. The law does not allow that. And it was like, oh. So in some cases, they were like really mad, and they requested, okay, so then I won't register. Or they were learning, or they needed time to think more about it. But among those who plan to register, they prefer pharmacies. There's no hassles. Of course, unlike the self-row and unlike gloves, at the beginning at least, the supply in pharmacies, once in place, should be warranted. So that would be very convenient for those who don't want to, worry about not having enough pot. So in sum, we believe that the law implementation, in light of this information, will face many challenges, but especially, as I was mentioning at the beginning of my presentations, individuals rely in more than one method to acquire marijuana, despite the provision of the law. And they will need to change their behavior to adapt to it, or ignore the law altogether. Rejection to the registry for a variety of reasons, it's another challenge. Some of them are more or less difficult to tackle, like the normative opposition could be virtually impossible to overturn. And also, there is little perception of risk among consumers, right? I mean, individuals perform a variety of activities under the influence. And this is not only a matter of, self-preservation, not even only a matter of public health. It's also linked to labor laws and controls and sanctions and a whole new line of actions that needs to be developed in Uruguay. I mean, it needs to be designed and implemented and monitored and tested. And we believe that in a way all these findings point to the same problem, which is related to the fact that a strong prevention and communication programs need to be put in place. The law itself has some prevention provisions, like, there won't be advertising of marijuana, for instance. So laws for selling and advertising of marijuana are much more strict than those for selling of tobacco, which are pretty rigid in Uruguay anyways. But we think more needs to be done. And in the same with communication programs. I mean, if high-frequency consumers don't know how the law will work, what can you expect from the rest of the population? I mean, this is probably also at the basis of the rejection of the law. So this is not a trivial aspect, and in a way it's been neglected in the implementation of the law. So we think barriers need to be charged on this and are likely going to be charged on this due to the change in office that is coming next week in Uruguay. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Paul, the floor is yours. Give us some thoughts, and then we'll open it up for your questions as well after Paul's comments. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you for this opportunity to join the Wilson Center. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate the researchers for a really fascinating piece of work. As many of you know, the OAS has been very active in this drug issue, especially over the last 3 years, starting with the summit in Cartagena, the production of our drug report, a couple of special general assemblies, all kinds of work towards the UN General Assembly, Special General Assembly on drugs. But I think, one of the common threads throughout, and something that all of our member states agree, is that you really need to develop policies that are based on evidence, and there's a shortage of evidence. So the fact that Uruguay has, before it even implements its regulation arrangement, has a study of this magnitude and integrity, and with the kinds of questions that have been asked, I think is remarkable, because these questions haven't been asked anywhere else in the world, I do not believe. So I think this is extremely innovative, very, very creative study, very, very important study, the kind of study that I think we'd be very interested in seeing in the United States. Because this type of study has not been done, and it wasn't done as a precondition when Colorado and Washington and some of these other states decided to introduce regulated markets. So I think the questions that you're asking are very, very important. for speaking a little more narrowly in terms of how something like this might be received in the hemisphere, I think it's important to note that in our own commission, we've been studying marijuana very carefully for the last 3 years. We have 2 commission meetings a year, and we usually spend at least a half a day just looking at the issue of marijuana, and Uruguay has been on the scope. And there's been a lot of debate within our commission about the Uruguayan experiment. And so I think this would also enrich our debate in the commission. So I hope maybe we can arrange for you to talk to our commissioners at our next meeting, because I think they would be very interested. A lot of the debate in our commission has centered around a question of how can one actually put into place a regulated system? How complex is it and how difficult? And the Uruguayans, I think, spoke very confidently, largely because of their the success that they had with tobacco and the fact that Uruguay is a small country, 3 million people. They had a pretty good handle on the number of users, that the implementation problems would be less, and that their capability of actually putting to place a regulatory system, they were confident that they could do this. But of course, they've been moving rather deliberately. The system's still not up and running. It probably won't actually be up and running in terms of the pharmacies till a bit later this year. And I think they are operating deliberately because I think they are taking into account a number of the issues that you've put on the table, plus other issues. And I just want to go in and say a few words about those issues, because I think they're really important, and some of them underlie some of the things that you've raised. One of the issues is, of course, risk perception, and you've done some concrete studies to kind of take a look at the risk perception largely among adults for cannabis consumption. But I think the other critical issue, and it's certainly a big issue for all our countries, is risk perception among youth. And whether the young people who begin marijuana, especially at a very young age, what type of health risk perception do they have? So that would be something that I would suggest also you might want to add to the study. It's one thing to talk about using heavy machinery. It's another thing about a young person to think about things like impact on educational achievement, impact on the brain physiologically, especially if you begin to use marijuana at an early age. So I think from the perspective of our commissioners, one thing that that certainly we focus on all the time is age of first use, and how this program might change and possibly lower the age of first use. We know very well the Uruguayans don't want that to happen. They want to do everything possible in terms of prevention to make sure. But as you've commented in your survey, the overall prevalence has been going up in Uruguay. So the question is, once you introduce a regulated system, what's going to change there? Is it going to continue to go up, or can you put into place prevention mechanism so that you can try to bend that curve back down a little bit? So I think that's an important issue, the whole issue of prevention also. The second really important issue, and you raised it in terms of when you asked the folks about what do they think will happen, the impact on criminality, impact on organized crime, and what's going to happen to the illegal market once this system goes into place. And I think there were some interesting observations that you made specifically, that a number of people might not sign up for the registry. Well, that's not a good thing, because the Uruguayans, we know, and as you pointed out, one of their primary objectives is that people do sign up for the registry. They take the business away from the black market and they put it into the official system. And we know very well, because we've been working with the Uruguayans, and my colleague, Dr. Kumsiye, who is here with me today, is actually a member of the Monitoring Evaluation Committee that's supporting the Uruguayans. And we know very well they're concerned about this, and they have some variables that they can use to affect this outcome, which are still being deliberated. One of those is, what is the THC content going to be of the product that's sold in the pharmacies? So that could also affect whether people sign up or not. The other issue is price and purity. And I think you mentioned, I think we hadn't heard this before, that there's already something of a market for these flowers that are probably more higher THC content. But how much is that going to be? The surety that people know what is the product they're going to buy, what's the price, versus when you go in the black market, you don't know exactly necessarily what you're getting. I think that's very important. I think it's important to contrast that with what happened, say, in the state of Colorado, where they introduced the program without requiring THC labeling on a lot of the products. They did require it on the edible products, but not on the smokable products. And now afterwards, they're having to go and revisit that. And that gets back to another, I think, really important distinction between the program in the United States and the program in Uruguay, which is the whole commercial focus. The Uruguayans, as you pointed out, very rightly so, want to have a prohibition on advertising. They're not interested. They don't consider it to be successful if there are more users. They don't want to increase the number of users. Whereas in the United States, especially in the state of Colorado, and we've had a lot of investigation of Colorado in our commission, there's a lot of advertising. There are websites. There's even a version of the Denver Post called the Cannabist, which kind of is very favorable towards the regulated industry. And the kind of balance between the health concerns and the commercial concerns is very, very different. So I think that the fact that Uruguay is more focused on the health issues, focused on prevention, is focused on diminishing organized crime, impact on criminality. Those are very, very different than the way the program has played out in the United States, where, quite frankly, if you look at kind of the public debate and what people might consider to be the indicators of success of the program, they seem to be more in the sense of, well, how much revenue is being generated and how many taxes. That debate does not exist in Uruguay. They never intended taxes to be an indication. And I would say also in our commission, there are very few countries that would view any kind of successful program of this sort in terms of revenue generation. It's just not in the cards. So those are a few comments. Again, I think this is a very valuable study, very important. And it's important because it's being launched before the Uruguayans actually come and finalize all the aspects of their regulation. So hopefully this will inform some of the decisions that are still to be made. I think there are some very, very important points that were made by the various presenters. One is that this is really more of a kind of a top-down program as opposed to a bottom-up program in terms of it was an executive branch initiative. There's still, public opinion is still somewhat skeptical, and I think that skepticism then feeds into the very careful way that the government is going about putting together the program. The U.S. programs, at least the state initiatives, were very different. They were based on ballot initiatives, and again, the health voice very absent in the U.S. programs, in many of the programs, especially in Colorado. In Colorado, for example, there's been a debate over the last few months about how they might regulate edibles. Edibles are not permitted in the Uruguayan system, although it was interesting from your study that there still seem to be some out there. But they're not a big part. Of course, in Colorado, they're almost 50% of the recreational market. And in the last 3 or 4 months in Colorado, there was an effort by the health authorities of the state of Colorado to try to, first to try to perhaps provide a situation in which there was a pre-clearance of any edibles before they could go into the market. And once that failed, find some way in which the packaging could be changed so that products that weren't attractive to children could be pulled out of the market. But the industry was successful in getting that proposal withdrawn, and there's a new regulation that basically simply says, well, instead of having a brownie with 100 with a certain amount of THC in one brownie, you need to sort of put it into 10 slices, but it's still the same brownie, it's still the same gummy bear. So, you really have a different balance between industry and health in the United States than you do in Uruguay, and I think it's useful to note that. And I think one of the big questions for Uruguay also will be, while you have a state dominated model, will commercial considerations come in anyway? Is there any way to keep the business end of this out? For instance, for things like a lot of the products, the supplementary products that can be developed. And another point that you made, which I was not aware of, was the fact that there's already a certain amount of vaping going on using the vaporizers in Uruguay, because our conversations also with Uruguayans indicated that vaping was really not much of a factor there, nor were edibles. And therefore, the only products that are going to be sold are going to be the smokable variety. And so that's interesting too, because a lot of the creativity and a lot of the commercial creativity in the United States has come through the vaping and through the edibles and through the sales of these other devices. And maybe these devices are going to come down to Uruguay, and suddenly you'll have the commercialism, but it might come in through the back door. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about as well. And don't forget about websites either. There is a kind of a TripAdvisor for marijuana in the United States, the leafly.com website. I wouldn't be surprised if they wouldn't want to operate in Uruguay as well, and you'll start to get ratings and evaluations and customer surveys and this sort of thing. And all these things play into the youth as well, because people go on these websites, young folks, and they get messaging. They get a persistent messaging that I think contributes to a low perception of risk for these products. So while again it's noteworthy that the government is seeking to keep this regulated model, the state monopoly model, very unique, very distinctive, very valuable. I think you have to consider that business could come in. Within the last couple of months, there was a big cannabis fair in Uruguay a couple months ago, and all kinds of folks came down and showed their wares. It was very interesting because the Uruguayan Drug Commission was there, and they set up a little booth, a prevention booth, basically saying, we don't want you guys to do this. So it's quite fascinating. I don't think you would have seen that in the state of Colorado. I mean, it's very interesting. The model is very interesting. And again, just to congratulate you on the scope of your research. And to also let you know, we'd be interested in cooperating with you. I'm sure Dr. Akumsiye, who's also been doing some work on some of the surveys that are underway now, the 2014 survey, we've been working with the government of Uruguay on that. So once again, congratulations, and thank you very much. And Eric, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Let me just give the panel, you don't have to answer every question or every comment, but if there's one or two points you'd like to make, and then we will open it up to the audience for question. And if you're online, watching on the web, you can send us our questions as well to lap@wilsoncenter.org. Thank you. Anybody want to say anything? All valid points?
Yeah, totally.
Thank you, Paul. All right, good. Since we have a lot of people watching online and whatnot, we would like very much, and we are recording this, we would like very much for you to wait until there's a microphone so you can identify yourself and so on and so forth. Got a couple people, Howard here, and then there's having difficulty seeing, but a young woman in the back. Will take at least those two questions. Go ahead.
Thank you, Eric. Howard Woldridge, retired detective representing LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. The reason I'm here today is during my street experience as a cop, the drug prohibition policies of the U.S. were the most destructive, dysfunctional, and immoral policies since slavery and Jim Crow. A couple questions regarding the surveys. One, when did marijuana take off in Uruguay? In other words, when marijuana came into my high school the year after I graduated, and used from about 1968 to 1982, 83, skyrocketed. That you saw that multiple factors of prevalence going up in use. Was there a phenomena in Uruguay, say in this century, which would be correlating to what happened in America back in the 60s and 70s? And secondly, as far as perceived risk, I saw the big graphs on that. Do you have a science-based, excuse me, not you, does Uruguay have a science-based education system which is effective in presenting the facts to young people or adults, whereas in America we've had the DARE program for 30-odd years. 9 surveys have showed it to be an ineffective program. And if you're talking about, this is your brain on drugs, and you have a, fried egg, and these types of non-scientific ideas, or just say no, were obviously highly ineffective. And one last thing for Ambassador Simons, the Denver authorities just came out, the state government came out, in 2014, their best estimate of 130 tons of marijuana sold, about 60% of the marijuana sold was through the stores, 40% still through the black market. The black market share is being reduced as the prices come down. So in terms of the future, we're looking at a diminishing market for illegal product in Colorado going forward, which I think is a positive sign. And also the concerns of Colorado being the very first place in, 77 years to sell it, when they saw the problem with edibles, the government reacted and new packaging rules went into effect, as you noted, February 1st. So the government is responding to consumer demands, the people's concerns for making this as safe as possible.
Thank you. There's a question in the back, too. Just take a couple and then let our panel.
Hi, my name is Christina. I work for La Voz de America. I have a couple of questions for Ambassador Paul. The first one, which ideas will you implement or take from the study that we just saw in Uruguay that will be effective here in the U.S.? And then which are the challenges that you see and the Commission sees about regulating nationally the marijuana here in the United States? Today, Alaska, I think, approved a regulating system for marijuana.
Okay, you guys want to provide any responses?
Sure. About the trends, when did marijuana actually take off? This is not related to the law, right? I mean, there is a long-term trend that shows this tremendous increase in marijuana consumption, especially among youth. We have been discussing a lot about this. It goes together with other behaviors, like more liberalization behaviors. It goes hand in hand with very worrying increase in alcohol and heavy alcohol consumption among young individuals, but also hands in hand with a decrease in tobacco consumption by the youth. And this is related to your second question. There's been a very strong policy against tobacco consumption. It has to do, with the markets, and regulations of where you can actually smoke. Tobacco smoking is totally forbidden in public places. You cannot smoke at your job. It's totally forbidden in university campuses. So there has been a very effective policy. Also, advertising of tobacco products, it's highly restrictive. Actually, Uruguay is under an international, it's an international trial being sued by Philip Morris due to this. But also very strong educational policies. So for the first time now, the national survey of high school students showed that marijuana consumption was even higher than tobacco consumption. And so the trends for marijuana, it's going upward, as Rosario pointed, but for tobacco, it's going down. So we do have some evidence that strong policy, scientifically based policy, educational policies, are being successful. So this should probably be the grounds for, the marijuana prevention policy.
And just add that Uruguay decriminalized the consumption of marijuana in 1974. And this happened, I think, to a large extent because there were already a perception of the problem of consumption, and they didn't want to put, all those people in jail from, and this is basically 40 years ago, basically. So it's a long trend.
One additional thing is that you ask about like prevention and risk and how has the Uruguayan government has dealt with that, and they have meant many things, but during like the past 2 decades, many of the things that they have done, they are like focused on what they name consumo cuidado, which is kind of a care consumption or a risk reduction consumption. So in that sense, they have been like many things done, but very focused on certain publics. There were no kind of massive campaign regarding drugs consumption. That's kind of a difference, and in particular with what Fernanda was saying about tobacco.
Yeah, finally, there's also the availability. Some of our respondents for the respondent-driven sample study reported that they had to travel to Brazil to get the marijuana they consumed like 20, 25 years ago. That is not a problem anymore. So there is also marijuana available pretty much everywhere. So this should probably also explain the increased consumption by young individuals.
Paul?
Thank you. There were two questions. The first was which ideas from Uruguay might be transferred to the United States, and my recommendation would be that any state that considers moving in the direction of Colorado and Washington before they take a vote, that they ask these individuals here to conduct the same survey in that state that they conducted in Uruguay, with a lot of more detailed questions and granularity about what the impacts on society of one of these programs would be. Because in the United States, we really only had these very general questions, Gallup polls that say, do you favor or do you not favor? And those don't really get into the more specific concerns about, okay, let's say, what would be the impact on youth consumption, this sort of thing, what's the impact on criminality? So I think that having this type, a little bit more work done before you actually take the leap, I think would be quite interesting, and especially given the kind of media enthusiasm for marijuana legalization in this country. And then the second question about the challenges nationally, I think one of the biggest, the U.S. has by far the most federal system of marijuana of any country in the hemisphere. It's very, very federal. There's a lot more state activism. So I think it's really hard to make generalizations in the United States about the view of the country as a whole. Each state has its own reality. And so I think you have to drill down a little bit more. And I think national kinds of surveys are not all that terribly useful because you really do have a lot of different situations. And in particular in the United States, you have a lot of different situations with respect to those states which have already put into place medical marijuana programs and what the experience has been with those programs. So that was something that was not the case in Uruguay.
Okay, we have time, a couple more questions, and I have one emailed question that I'll add in.
I have two quick questions. First of all, do you have any
Could you
insights?
identify yourself, please?
My name is Ruben Baller from the Science Policy Branch at NIDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse.
Great.
Do you have any insight as to the potency trends in the last 10 years, say, in Uruguay? That's a quick question. And then looking at this high increase, you mentioned tenfold between 2001 and 2011 in the regular use on one hand and the low perception of risk on the other. Are there any studies in Uruguay looking at the involvement of marijuana in vehicular crashes, in accidents on the roads? Do you monitor marijuana in vehicular crashes? Because we keep having these studies here in the States that they show both ways, depending on who does the study, whether or not marijuana increases the likelihood of vehicular crashes. That's it.
Thank you. There's a question over here.
Hi, my name is Nick. I'm with the Department of State. I also have two questions. You had mentioned that the President-elect Tabaré Vázquez has had some differing opinions regarding this law and its implementation, and I'm wondering if, after his inauguration, you foresee any changes in the law or the implementation. And my second question is, can you comment on Uruguay's current relationship with some of the international regulatory bodies, in particular the INCB, the International Narcotics Control Board, whether they are currently at risk for any sanctions? Thanks.
And then there was a question that was emailed me, and I think it's beyond the scope of the study, but you might have some idea. Here's the question: does the form of payment affect consumption? the banking system, supervision, et cetera. This has been an issue in Colorado, and implementation of law in Colorado, and I assume Washington, although I haven't read that, you know, how people pay for now legal product is an issue. So maybe that's come up. Go ahead.
Okay, about the potency trends, we don't know, but we will. That's the good news. Consumers report that potency is decreasing, especially for the marijuana that comes from Paraguay. They complain all the time, but this is anecdotal experience. Well, actually, not only anecdotal, we have questions about the perceived potency of the marijuana they consume and how it relates to the marijuana they typically consume, and they report that the THC levels are decreasing. There are very few reliable studies about the potency of the marijuana available in the market. It's really hard you need a court order, you know, for the Forensics Institute to get a sample. Samples are bad. Our research project has an ongoing project, and we are about to receive samples of marijuana purchased in the streets, flowers purchased in the streets as well, flowers grown at home, and we will have a map of the, you know, of the THC levels. That will not account for the trend, but at least will be a starting point for, you know, where we are standing now. We are just waiting approval because, as I said, you need a court order, and we might be in trouble if we collect the samples without, you know, all the proper authorizations. About the impact of marijuana in car accidents, no, we don't have data. We have a ton of data about the impact of alcohol in car accidents, and there have been a lot of campaigns, unfortunately not very successful regarding that. And Uruguay has just started to measure presence of marijuana in drivers as of last August. So it will be a time. The equipment is highly sophisticated and expensive to do that. I mean, for a country the size of Uruguay anyways. But there are measures, but this is more related to prevention measures. So actually the authority, Roads Authority sort of advertise when they are going to be testing, high frequency, holiday weekends, that kind. So they advertise that they will be testing for marijuana. And for police officer to be testing for marijuana, since the test is so expensive, they first wait for other signs like, red eyes or, the way they interact with the drivers. So, a high level of positive test is also unreliable because they sort of handpicked the individuals to be tested. So there is a lot to do in that regard.
Maybe I can follow with a Vasquez question.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe regarding Vasquez and his new government, I think that, at the beginning, at the beginning of his campaign, there were several questions and concerns about his position because, as Fernanda said, the Vasquez is not Mujica, that's very clear, and during the electoral campaign, he made some remarks regarding the law. For example, he said that it was kind of incredible that marijuana will be sold on pharmacies, and he clearly stated that this is not his favorite law. But on the other side, he was pretty clear too that he will keep it and watch it and see how things will come along, and then decide if he will change something or not. So we have to wait and see. And I think that in general, he will be more attentive to follow closely the implementation. And maybe he will change something. We really don't know. He certainly will not overcome or throw out the law.
About the relation with the international drug control regime, I mean, yes. Regulation in Uruguay basically has put Uruguay against the treaties that comprise the international drug control regime. We know that there's been a lot of debate within the International Narcotics Control Board. I mean, and that basically what Uruguay did has opened the debate. We don't know whether that will lead to sanctions or not, but we know, for instance, that within the board, there's been some, division, disagreements on how to deal with Uruguay regarding this. So, but so far we don't know whether Uruguay will face sanctions because of this violation of the treaties.
Paul, I wonder if you have some insights on that, since you work on the international level. I don't want to put you on the spot, I'm sorry. But, I mean, the other obvious question, directed to anybody here, is, what impact does this have on the United States, too? The same treaty obligations, the fact that some local jurisdictions now have legalized, does that put us at, the United States at risk in any way? Any insights?
Well, fortunately, I am no longer the acting assistant secretary for narcotics at the State Department. So I don't have to go. I don't have to go to the INCB and make those explanations. We are merely the hemispheric drug commission. But certainly, I think there's an active dialogue underway between Uruguay and the United States and the INCB. And I think within our commission, which is what I can speak to, there has been a lot of recognition of respect for what the Uruguayans are doing. But not necessarily agreement that would work in the other countries. But I think a great interest in tracking what happens and in kind of looking at the analytical side. But a recognition also that the state of play in many of the other countries in the hemisphere is not such that this would be the route that people would go. But I think it's also important to recognize there are many other ways that you can go about having kind of a more humane approach to drug policy, and they don't necessarily have to include the creation of a regulated market. A lot of our countries have decriminalized personal use. We have a big campaign underway now to take a look at proportionality of sentences and alternatives to incarceration. And so the policy spectrum is pretty wide, and everyone, I think, respects what Uruguay is doing, but they say, well, we may want to do this, or maybe we want to do this first and see how it goes.
I mean, it does seem that in the hemisphere, there's a consensus that we should discuss those things, but not really much of a consensus over which direction to take things. Would that seem fair to you? Yeah, okay. Any other questions? We have time for one or two more.
Procedural question. If I want to share these results with my science policy colleagues at NIDA, is there a way the researchers would share?
Hold on. Can you just repeat that? Because
Yeah, if I want to share these results with my colleagues at NIDA, is there a way the researchers will make this presentation available or the results in any format to other people?
Yes. As we said at the beginning, these are the preliminary results. There is a handout with the results that have been presented here. But at some point, we expect to produce a complete report on that, and you will see later on. We'll have even the data of the respondent-driven sample uploaded in our websites later on in the year. But yes, we expect. I mean, we conducted this research expecting to make it public, and so people can see our data and discuss on that. So yes.
within 24 hours, we will have posted the video from this session, as well as the printed out summary that we were given by the researchers.
And
that'll
the
be-
PowerPoint maybe too.
Yeah, if you send,
Yes,
yeah. So all what you've heard this morning will be publicly available within 24 hours. So, was there a last question over here somewhere? I don't want to cut anybody off. Any idea on the banking question, just out of curiosity? Did they include that in the regulation?
No, not yet. And most of the law is a big framework law, which is being regulated step by step. Probably they are not even decided on that yet.
Right. All right. Well, thank you all very, very much for being here this morning. Thank you to our panelists for their hard work. Thank you, Ambassador Simons, for joining us. And we appreciate your attendance. Thank you.
favor. Thank you.
Muy bueno. Excelente. Excelente todo.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Y si hay una oportunidad, nos encantaría mucho poder presentar esto a la comisión.
Creo que sería interesante.
De hecho, ellas se reunieron con representantes